never done this before, so I might make some mistakes in the process, particularly some technical errors. And so we're all learning how to do this together. There are two of us in the office hours. I'm Frederick Corey, and Brian Rothstein is here as well. And so we are happy to field any questions you've got, talk about complicated issues. We can talk about whatever it is you want to talk about. You know, we had a few questions that came up before this session began, and so we could perhaps start with those. And then we welcome you to join us. Can they call in? Can they? No, you have to come in. You use the chat function. That's very exciting. All these new media. Mm-hmm. So one of the questions that somebody posed before the session began is, what is communication apprehension? And that's an excellent question. That's a word that we hear out there all the time. We hear apprehension, and it's okay if we don't know what that means, particularly in the context of communication. We often hear it in terms of public speaking. And about public speaking, as many of us are. But what I would like to talk about is the overall concept of communication apprehension, and recognize that we can be apprehensive in all sorts of contexts. I might have interpersonal apprehension. I might have public apprehension. I might be reluctant to speak in a small group. And I'm wondering if you've ever felt that way. You're in a small group setting, maybe 5 to 7 people, and you just don't feel all that comfortable speaking out. And if you feel that way, it's perfectly okay. It's something to address, and we might be able to work on that together when we get to the unit on small group communication. So apprehension simply means the fear of participating, oftentimes public speaking, but it also happens in one-on-one situations. It happens on social media, like right now. I'm a little bit apprehensive myself, and it can also happen in small groups. Oh, okay. So I was just told that I couldn't speak in full volume. So I don't know what full volume is. I think full volume is a relative term, but we'll see. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? All right, so let's go on to some other topics, some other questions, and one of them relates to the notion of communication apprehension, and that is related to public speaking. You know, we're going to be talking about public speaking at length later on, but it's okay because these are oftentimes the first questions people have when it comes to communication. Why do I get so nervous before I speak in public? And the answer is because you care. People get nervous when they care about something. If you weren't nervous, that would be a sign to your audience that you could care less what happens. And so being nervous is actually a wonderful thing. It gives you all sorts of energy. It gives you all sorts of excitement. And it signals to the audience that you care very much about what's coming forward. What is another? Oh, here's another question. This one is a little bit... well, let's just go to the question, and then we can talk about why it's complex and confusing. Do men and women communicate in different ways? And the answer is not necessarily. That there's been a lot of research on this, and all the good research done on this topic is inconclusive. So we will go into popular culture, or we will turn on daytime TV and hear that men communicate one way and women communicate another way. But in truth, all of the good research is not going to come up with any kind of conclusion that says that men communicate in forceful ways and women communicate in passive ways. None of that turns out to be true when the research is good and solid and based in good social science. That we find variations across cultures, we find variations in geography. So we'll find greater difference, honestly, in geography than gender. So we could say, oh, well, where are you going to draw your sample from? Are you going to draw your sample from New York City? Or are you going to draw your sample from Boise, Idaho? Because there could be greater difference between New York City and Boise, Idaho than there is between men and women. So be careful when you're reading research or reading something in popular culture that says men communicate one way, women communicate another way. You really ought to look at the source and see if it's a credible source. And daytime TV is not always a credible source. So be careful. They're just trying to capture the fancy of somebody. Probably not you. All right, what are some other questions we've got here? Oh, somebody said, it wasn't really a question, although actually it is a question. How did I decide that I wanted to study human communication? And that's it's actually a great question. And it grew out of my love of literature, but I wasn't a particularly good reader. It wasn't until I learned how to listen to literature that I understood literature, which is kind of a weird path. But yeah, reading a novel was just something I was never very good at. But then when I heard novels read aloud, I discovered that I had a very deep understanding. And so what I learned about myself is that I'm an oral listener, or oral learner, that I learn when I hear things, not necessarily when I see things. So I took to reading things out loud to myself, and my apprehension increased dramatically. And that was the seed of my interest in the way we communicate with one another, because I believe the way we communicate with one another is also the way we learn, the way we communicate with teachers. And so that was my initial interest in communication studies. But I didn't major in as an undergrad. I majored in political science. I don't know why. It didn't, so often it really doesn't matter what you major in, just get an education. I mean, if you want to be an architect, you have to get a degree in architecture, that's for sure. But if you want to make things, if you want to be creative, you can get a degree in all sorts of things. So I majored in political science. I just thought it was interesting. And I focused on local community management. How does a community develop? Community development, it was called. But then when I was a little bit older, I thought, well, what was my passion? And my passion was actually that notion of listening to literature. So I went in to study that more deeply, and that brought me back to communication studies. So that's how that happened. And I bet every one of you has an interesting story on what brought you to where you are at this particular moment in time. And I wonder, Brian, are you able to talk? If I put on mute, are you able to talk and talk about what brought you to communication studies? Can I put you on the spot there?
Sure. Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, now I got to figure out how to a bunch of feedback.
How's that?
Okay, Brian, I'm muted, so you can't hear. Well, now I'm unmuted, but now I'm going to mute. And maybe you would talk about what brought you to communication studies.
Okay, sure. All right, so what brought me to communication was when I was a freshman going into my undergrad at ASU. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I didn't really have a set idea like some of my other friends. And I originally started out as a marketing major because I thought that would be interesting. I did a semester of marketing, took some math classes, and decided that was not for me and was looking for something else to switch my major to. So I switched over to communication because I realized that communication is in everything that we do every day, no matter what job that you're in, no matter what field, you have to communicate with people in some form or some manner. So if you can be good at communicating, I felt like you can apply those skills to be able to do pretty much anything else that you want to. And it was a very broad field for someone who didn't know exactly what they wanted to do. I just thought it would give me an excellent base of interpersonal skills that I could use to translate into the workforce once I graduated. So then I got done with my undergrad and decided to go and get my master's degree at ASU West in the Max program there. And although I'm not working in anything that is directly related to communication, my full time job is that I actually run a fantasy sports website. The communication background that I have does indeed come in handy when I'm dealing with customers, interacting with other businesses, trying to make deals, stuff like that. So the communication background that I have definitely provides an excellent foundation for my job and my daily life as well. So that's kind of my story.
Hey, Brian, that is excellent. And I know this isn't directly related to the topic of communication, but I'm going to go follow up with what you had to say in any case. As many of you, I'm Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education at ASU, and that means I help the undergraduate students at the university navigate their way through the system. And one of the challenges that many students face is how to pick a major. Students just belabor this, not everybody, some, but students say, well, I love history, but I can't major in history because I don't know what I'm going to do with that degree. Or philosophy majors don't make any money. Well, actually, philosophy majors happen to make quite a bit of money. If you look at the data across the board, philosophy majors do exceptionally well. History majors also do well. What we learn in the liberal arts and sciences is that we develop a set of what we call transferable skills. So what does a history major know how to do? A history major knows how to separate fact from fiction. A history major knows how to sift through all sorts of information and pull out what's most important. A history major knows how to write clearly, to explain complicated details in a way that the reader will understand. What organization doesn't need somebody who can separate fact from fiction, go through piles of information, extract the most important material for the comprehension of others? Every organization needs somebody like that. Same thing with communication. Just Brian, like what you were saying, as you were saying, it's like, what organization doesn't need somebody who knows the nuances of human communication, how to understand cultural differences in communication? Every organization needs somebody like that. And biology is so important to every aspect of human life. What does a city need with a biologist? Well, take the next flood, for example, to understand exactly what kind of microorganisms are floating down the street when the sewer backed up. And the good city needs a biologist around. Same thing with chemistry and physics. I was watching a tree come down not too long ago, and I thought, well, those people cutting down that tree may not have studied physics, but believe me, they know physics, because they know that if they move that big tree trunk in one direction, the other part of the tree trunk is going to move in a different direction and slam somebody in the head. So the liberal arts and sciences are actually extraordinary for career preparation. So the most important thing we've discovered is that people should follow their passion. Major what you love in, and then develop all those transferable skills so that when you're on the job interview, you're able to explain to people how much you learned in that liberal arts and science degree and how valuable it is for whatever it is that you're doing. But that's not the subject of this office hour, but I went off on that. It's an important topic, though, and feel free to ask if you ever feel like you're lost in terms of what you should major in at the university, because I'd be more than happy to help you. So some of the other topics that have been coming up and around in the discussion board, the discussion boards are fascinating, by the way. This is an incredibly self-reflective group, a very thoughtful group, and very respectful group. And so that may be one of the first and most important themes we could discuss is the importance of respect. Do we always agree with each other? No. Can you respect somebody you disagree with? Absolutely. That you can support people you disagree with. You can ask for more information. You can say, well, my experience actually was quite different. And that's just a very nice way of saying, well, I disagree, or I don't know where you're coming from, or what you're saying is new to me. And so it take me some time to process it. But it's that whole notion of civility and respect that will bring us all forward dramatically. So cultural differences, there have been some really exciting themes brought up. And one of the most interesting for me has been this notion of discovery, that I always thought I was X, and then somebody told me my father was actually Y, and I never thought that I was Y. So now I'm having to grapple with this kind of identity that I never associated with myself. And it makes me wonder if I have some of the cultural attributes that took me by surprise. And so that's really exciting, I think. And the other part is sort of evolution. I think that two themes that have come up is of people's identities changing over time have to do with religion and sexuality. Is that I may have been born to believe that I was a certain religion, or told that I was a certain religion, but as I got older, I thought, as I reflect on it, I don't know that I feel like I am as much of that religion as I have always been told that I was. And then same with sexuality. It was always assumed that I was X, and as life goes on, I discover that I'm feeling more Y. So how do I grow? The amount of critical on the discussion board has been absolutely marvelous. So thank you for all of that. Let's see, what are some other topics that have come up? Shyness. So here's a fun question. Are you an introvert or an extrovert? And does it depend on the situation? For many of us, it depends on the situation. Is that like with family, I'm an extrovert, very talkative. And when I'm around strangers, I'm an introvert. I don't want to open and be the first to communicate. So that is shyness, is I'm not going to be first. And it's actually a kind of a natural phenomenon, and one might even begin to argue that it's based in part in biology, self-protection. That I'm not going to be the first to come out and talk about things in a room because I need to protect myself. And so that's part of shyness. And I don't know. It's the introvert. It's neither good nor bad. It takes all kinds. All right. What other topics have we got here? Yeah. Next time, we need people to join us live, so this could be more like a radio show. Call-in radio, COM 100 talk radio. All right, last topic I see that came in beforehand, the relationship between food and cultural identity. And as you might imagine, there is a very strong relationship. We had some wonderful posts about being Italian and the relationship between Italian culture and food. And it's very strong. It's the food itself. So, we have our prosciutto, and we have pasta and bread and some red meats and chicken and fish that are cooked in a very Italian way with Italian spices. But what are some of the other aspects of food that are related to communication? So dinner, there might be a Sunday dinner that is all about family, that the whole family is expected to show up for Sunday dinner at grandma's house, and everybody's going to be together, and there's going to be family conversation, and maybe we're going to try to turn our cell phones off, try strenuously to disassociate ourselves from our ongoing attachment to the cell phone, and talk to one another and be with one another. And in that way, food is relational, that it's all about the relationships we form over food. And that oftentimes is tied to religion or ethnicity or nationality. And there might be some gender roles affiliated with food too, right? Especially in bygone days where maybe some people think, oh, well, the women should be in the kitchen and the men should be in front of the TV watching the game. I think we're beginning to see some of that pass over time. But yeah, food is very, very important in terms of culture, identity, how we form relationships, how we maintain relationships, how we learn to act like family members in the way we're supposed to, as prescribed by parents or grandparents or uncles or aunts. And that's a wonderful, rich topic. Food, culture, identity, and performance. So Jill, who I think many of you know, just suggested that we close by previewing what's coming next. So we began this whole course with an overview of communication itself, and then we introduced some broad concepts of culture and identity. Now we're going to be moving into verbal communication, which is the use of language. We're going to be talking about nonverbal communication, which is all forms of communication other than words. So those are the two next topics. This is sort of incremental. They're all interconnected. You can't really separate verbal communication from nonverbal communication in practice, but in analysis, we most certainly can, and that's what we're going to be doing next. So we look forward to working with you in the future as this course unfolds. Brian, how about if I turn it over to you for some parting words and good wishes to everybody? Now I've got to figure out. Okay, Brian, I'm going to mute and you can bid us all adieu.
You who are on here today, just wanted to thank you for joining us, and hopefully this worked out well for everybody. I didn't see any questions posted live onto the YouTube chat, but hopefully some people will go back and watch this later, and if you have any other questions, just post into the general discussion on the course website. If there's anything that we can follow up on, or if there's anything that we can do for you, any questions about anything, just let one of us know. So we're here to help, and that's what we're here for. So we'll be headed on to verbal communication in the next module, and we'll go from there. And again, if you need anything, just feel free to shoot me an email or post into the discussion on the site, and I'll make sure I get back to you as soon as I can.